update it to reflect modern realities, and this bill, I don't believe, makes any effort to do that.
That is correct. Thank you.
Congresswoman Pressley of Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This has been a very interesting hearing. Charges of radicalism, accusations of motives of partisanship, but never a peep or outrage about partisan gerrymandering, which has benefited your party for decades. That is really convenient and rich and hypocritical. H.R. 1 has been described as a wish list by the Democrats. Well, you've got us there. A wish list for an inclusive, expanded democracy and electorate. Characterizations of H.R. 1 as a power grab. You got us again, guilty. We wouldn't have to grab back the power for the people if through policy you weren't complicit in or perpetuating the disenfranchisement and marginalization of the people, and disproportionately people of color, and disproportionately Black people. Representative John Lewis reminds us that if your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't work so hard to take it from you. This is the House of Representatives. We are sent here as representatives of our districts and a greater democracy. And at the core of democracy and the root word of demos is to engage more voices, and to empower them in this democracy. I am really at a loss for words. I am embarrassed and hurt by the dog whistles, by the vitriol and the venom in this space, and the smugness. It is stunning and unconscionable. Disappointment and outrage about a federal holiday for Election Day, early voting and mail-in voting, the rights of formerly incarcerated restored. According to the Sentencing Project, 6.1 million Americans have lost their right to vote due to felony disenfranchisement laws that disproportionately impact communities of color. Ms. Flynn, the United States ranks 26 among the lowest of all established democracies around the world in voter turnout. Certainly belies characterizations of American exceptionalism. Could you speak to the passage of H.R. 1 and the establishment of a federal voting holiday, how this would help to broaden turnout, particularly for voters who have historically been disenfranchised? Could you also speak to how many developed countries follow this practice and how it has impacted their turnout?
Yes, I apologize, I do not have information, but I will share it with the committee about other countries. But I will say that a federal holiday can make a huge difference for many Americans who cannot afford to take a day off of work to get to the polls, or as we have seen Common Cause and the Lawyers Committee and many other voting rights groups do election protection during the election season. And we saw long lines in states across the country. We had machines that were breaking down or switching votes. We had machines that did not work, and so people had long lines. Many people cannot afford to wait in line for 3, 4, 5 hours at a polling place. Many have to get back to work. So a federal holiday would make a big difference.
Thank you very much. Mr. Amy, so we've spoken a great deal about lobbying corruption. I'd like to speak about the corruption of contractors. Mr. Amy, in your written testimony, you discussed the crisis of the rampant revolving door, where ranking officials commonly enter cushy jobs for the very contractors they were charged with overseeing on behalf of taxpayers. Last year, your organization issued an investigative report that Tracy Valero, a former senior official for ICE, less than 3 months after leaving government service, she was hired by the GEO Group, ICE's largest single private prison and detention center, which brought in more than $327 million in the last year alone. She even served as an expert witness for the company in a lawsuit that alleged violations of minimum wage laws and other inhumane treatment of immigrant detainees. Mr. Amy, in your expert opinion, is it ethical for a senior government contracting office to go work for the very entity she was overseeing just months before?
The quick answer is no, and that's where the law is created that has cooling off periods. And so there's no cooling off period, a 1 year, a 2 year, or permanent bans. HR 1 would move a lot of those to 2 years, I think, which would be beneficial. And there's even disagreement in our community whether 1 year or 2, what is the appropriate time to kind of cool off so that your contacts aren't there. But this is also something that President Trump brought up. When he was a candidate, he talked about, I think it was Boeing at the time, but he went on record saying that people who give contracts should never be able to work for that defense contractor. This is a bipartisan issue. This is something we can resolve. The laws are already on the books. We just need some extensions and some tweaking of those to improve them and allow people to cool off and not be able to provide a competitive advantage to their new employer or favor them as they're in office and they're walking out the door.
And so you do believe that extending this cooling off period and strengthening these prohibitions would protect the integrity of the process and help to rein in these flagrant abuses? 100%.
And one of the nice things with HR 1 is there is an extension of a cooling off period for people coming into government service. Currently it exists and it's 1 year. This will move it to 2. And I think that's a probably better place to be, that you shouldn't be handling issues that involve your former employer or clients.
One final question. How might these cozy relationships between government officials and corporate leaders or private contractors help to boost profits for these prison and detention centers?
Well, certainly they go with a lot of information when they go over to the private sector, but it also allows them to get back into their former office and within their former agency and call on them. Access, as you were just pointing out, access is everything in this town. And so if you can get your phone calls answered, if you can get emails read, if you get meetings, at that point that can, not only with members of Congress, but with agency heads, that can determine who gets contracts. I mean, it does trickle down from the top, and we need to make sure that we prevent as many like actual and also appearances of conflicts of interest we can.